Walk through any neighborhood built before 1960, and the houses tell you things. A small door cut low into the brick near the kitchen steps. A pair of galvanized iron T-posts standing in the backyard with wire sagging between them. A hinged board folded flush against the inside of a cabinet door, waiting to fold out into a full ironing surface. These weren't curiosities when they were installed, they were just how a house worked. American homes from the 1880s through the early 1980s were packed with built-in features, purpose-built alcoves, and everyday conveniences that have since been designed out of existence, replaced by appliances, forgotten by builders, or swept away by the shift from making do to buying new. Some disappeared so gradually that nobody noticed they were gone. Others vanished inside a single decade when one new technology made them obsolete overnight. Number 100. The milk chute. Before refrigerated delivery trucks and supermarket dairy aisles, the milkman came to your door several times a week, and the house was built to receive him without waking anyone inside. The milk chute was a small insulated compartment set into the exterior wall near the kitchen or side entry, with a hinged door on the outside for the milkman and a matching door on the inside for whoever came downstairs first. Sizes varied, but most were wide enough for 2 glass quart bottles and deep enough to hold 4 to 6. The insulation was modest, usually cork batting or a layer of fiberglass, but it kept the morning delivery cool until someone came to bring it in. By the late 1960s, as supermarkets absorbed the weekly grocery trip and home delivery routes shrank, the chute stopped receiving anything. Most were sealed during renovations. Number 99. The cast iron boot scraper. Before paved sidewalks lined every street and mudrooms caught the mess at the back door, the front step of an American home came with a piece of iron hardware that most people today couldn't name on site. The boot scraper was a U-shaped or flat cast iron bar set into the masonry beside the front door, positioned at just the right height to catch the sole of a muddy boot. You hooked the heel of your shoe over the bar and dragged it clean before stepping inside. Hardware stores sold them as standard items, and most builders installed them as a matter of course through the early 20th century. They appeared in Sears and Montgomery Ward catalogs well into the 1940s. Concrete sidewalks, gravel drives, and the simple fact that most people stopped walking through unpaved yards to reach the front door made them obsolete. But in older neighborhoods, they're still embedded in the brick beside front stoops, stubborn and rusted, long after anyone needed them. Number 98. The telephone alcove. When the telephone arrived in American homes in the early decades of the 20th century, it was not treated as a portable device you carried from room to room. It was treated like furniture, and the house was designed around it. Builders began carving a small recessed niche into the wall of the front hallway or near the kitchen, just wide enough to hold the telephone and a notepad, sometimes with a narrow shelf below and a single outlet above. By the post-war years, the telephone alcove appeared in new construction as a standard feature, often with a built-in seat beside it and a small drawer for the phone book. The assumption was that a telephone call was a sit-down event, a conversation that deserved a chair and a writing surface. Cordless phones in the 1980s and cell phones in the 1990s made the concept of a fixed telephone location feel quaint almost overnight. The alcoves were filled in, painted over, or converted to electrical niches. Number 97. The coal chute. Through the first half of the 20th century, most American homes were heated by coal, and the house was built with a direct delivery system that required no one to carry anything through the front door. The coal chute was a covered opening in the foundation wall, usually at ground level or just below, positioned above the coal bin in the basement. When the delivery wagon or truck arrived, the driver opened the chute cover and slid a metal trough inside. The coal poured down the ramp and rattled into the bin below with a sound the whole block could hear. The opening was typically covered by a cast iron or steel door, hinged at the top and latched at the bottom. Coal delivery peaked in American cities through the 1940s. The shift to natural gas and oil furnaces across the 1950s and 1960s made the chute redundant. Most homes converted the coal bin to a storage room and sealed the exterior door. Number 96. The ice delivery door. Before mechanical refrigeration reached ordinary households, The icebox was the appliance that kept food from spoiling. And because the icebox was heavy and the blocks of ice that fed it were heavier still, most homes in northern cities were designed to make the delivery efficient. The ice door was a small hinged panel set into the exterior kitchen wall or the back hallway, positioned directly across from the ice compartment of the icebox inside. The iceman could slide a 50-pound block through the wall from outside without entering the home. Some houses had a corresponding inner door that opened directly into the top of the icebox itself, making the transfer entirely hands-off. The electric refrigerator became widely affordable through the 1930s, and ice delivery began a long decline. By 1960, the iceman's routes had contracted to a handful of commercial accounts. Number 95. The laundry chute. Before stackable washer-dryer units were tucked into hallway closets on the main floor, doing laundry meant going to the basement, and the house was engineered to make that trip less burdensome. The laundry chute was a vertical shaft built into the wall, running from the upstairs bathroom or hallway directly down to the basement laundry area, with a hinged door at the top and an open mouth at the bottom that dropped clothes into a basket or onto the sorting table below. Families used them constantly. A Saturday morning in a house with a laundry chute was marked by the soft thump of sheets sailing down through the wall. Children tested the size limits. The chutes began disappearing from new construction in the 1970s and 1980s as finished basements pushed laundry appliances upstairs, as open floor plans eliminated interior wall cavities, and as fire codes began treating unprotected vertical shafts through floors as hazards. A house built after 1990 almost certainly doesn't have one. Number 94. The dumbwaiter. In homes with more than one story, particularly those built between the 1880s and the 1940s, moving food from the kitchen to the dining room meant carrying it up a flight of stairs. For households with the means to build it in, the alternative was a small mechanical lift set into the wall between floors. The dumbwaiter was a wooden box, usually about 2 feet square, running on a rope and pulley system inside a narrow shaft. You loaded the box in the kitchen, pulled the rope, and the box rose to the floor above where someone opened the matching door to unload it. In grander homes, it served the dining room directly. In more modest houses, it connected the kitchen to a butler's pantry or a hallway closet. The open floor plan era that followed World War II made the single-story or open-stair layout the dominant residential form, and the dumbwaiter became an expensive solution to a problem the new layouts had eliminated. Number 93. Transom windows. Before central air conditioning was standard in American homes, the house itself was the ventilation system, and one of its most effective components was the transom, a narrow hinged window mounted directly above a doorframe, typically in interior hallways and between rooms. When the transoms were open, cool air from north-facing rooms moved through the house at ceiling level, where heat collected and needed somewhere to go. A house with open transoms could drop its interior temperature by several degrees on a warm night without a single electrical appliance running. They appeared in virtually every American home built before 1940 and remained common in new construction through the early post-war years. Central air conditioning arrived in residential construction through the 1950s and removed the transom's reason for existing. Builders dropped them to reduce framing costs and simplify wall heights. In older city row houses and farmhouses, they're still visible above the interior doors, sometimes still on their original pivoting hardware and sometimes painted shut for the last 50 years. Number 92. The built-in ironing board. For much of the 20th century, ironing was not an occasional errand, but a near-daily task. Cotton shirts, linen tablecloths, and cotton house dresses didn't go from the line to the closet without attention. Builders accommodated this by installing a fold-down ironing board inside a shallow cabinet recessed into the wall, typically in the kitchen or near the laundry. The board folded out on a hinged bracket at counter height, and when not in use it folded back against the cabinet interior, which latched closed. The cabinet often included a sleeve board and a small iron rest. Permanent press fabric finishes arrived in the early 1960s, and by the 1970s the amount of daily ironing in the average American household had dropped sharply. The built-in board became an oddity in new construction and was simply dropped from plans. In older houses, it still turns up inside kitchen cabinets, its door mistaken by new owners for a utility access panel or a broom closet they can't quite figure out. Number 91. The Murphy bed. The fold-down wall bed arrived in American homes in the early 1900s as a practical response to the shortage of space in growing cities. William Lawrence Murphy received a patent for his mechanism in 1911, and by the 1920s the Murphy bed was a fixture in urban apartments and small bungalows where a separate bedroom was something only some households could afford. The bed folded vertically into a cabinet or alcove that, when closed, looked like a wardrobe or a section of built-in shelving. When pulled down, it occupied most of a small room. The mechanism was spring-loaded, so a well-balanced Murphy bed could be lowered and raised with one hand. Parlors, studies, and front rooms that served as sleeping quarters by night and sitting rooms by day were built around them. As post-war prosperity expanded house sizes through the 1950s, the Murphy bed shifted in meaning from clever engineering to tight circumstances. New construction stopped including them as standard. Number 90. The whole house attic fan. Before central air conditioning became common in residential construction, the attic fan was the primary cooling technology in millions of American homes. It was a large fan, often 3 or 4 feet across, mounted in a louvered opening in the ceiling of an upstairs hallway or directly in the attic floor. When switched on in the evening, it pulled air through open windows at ground level, up through the rooms, and out through the attic vents, drawing a current of cooler night air through the entire house in minutes. The fans were loud. In neighborhoods where several households ran them on a July night, you could hear the collective hum from the street. Many children fell asleep to that sound every summer of their childhood without knowing what made it. The central air conditioner, arriving in residential construction through the late 1950s and into the 1960s, displaced the attic fan in new builds. Number 89. The sleeping porch. From roughly the 1890s through the 1950s, the screened sleeping porch was considered not a luxury but a health measure. Medical opinion at the turn of the century held that fresh, night air was essential to sound health, and architects responded by attaching a screened upper-floor porch to middle-class homes, reachable from the master bedroom or a hallway, and furnished with simple cots or narrow beds. Families in the humid South and the sticky Midwest moved to the sleeping porch from late spring through early fall. The screens kept out mosquitoes while letting in whatever breeze the night offered. Sleeping porches appeared on Sears kit homes, in craftsman bungalows, and on modest frame houses across the country through the first half of the 20th century. When window air conditioning units became affordable in the 1950s and 1960s, families moved back inside permanently. New construction dropped the sleeping porch from plans entirely. Number 88. The wooden screen door. The aluminum storm door that most American homes have today is a direct descendant of the wooden screen door, but it lacks almost everything that made its predecessor memorable. The original version was built from light pine or fir with a simple frame, a wire mesh panel, and a spring closer that made a sound every American child of the mid-20th century knows without being told what it is. A sharp bang followed by the rattle of the frame settling against the jamb. The slam of a screen door was the percussion instrument of the American summer. These doors appeared in catalogs from the 1880s onward and were standard on virtually every house with a back or side entry used for daily traffic. By the 1970s, aluminum and hollow-core steel doors began replacing them, offering better weathering with less maintenance. Number 87. The front porch swing. In the era before air conditioning, before television, and before the suburban backyard became the primary outdoor living space, the front porch was the social center of the neighborhood, and no piece of porch furniture was more central to that life than the swing. A wooden bench suspended from the porch ceiling on chains, long enough for 2 adults and a child, set at a height that let your feet just graze the floorboards as it moved. Hardware stores sold the chains and mounting hooks as standard items. Porch swings appeared on craftsman bungalows, Victorian homes, farmhouses, and modest post-war ranches alike. As television drew families indoors through the 1950s, and as neighborhoods shifted their outdoor living from the front porch to the backyard patio in the 1960s, the front porch itself began disappearing from new construction plans. Builders of post-war subdivisions often put no porch on their houses at all, just a concrete slab and a metal railing. Number 86. The clothesline T-posts. In the backyard of nearly every American house built before 1960 stood a pair of galvanized iron T-posts driven into the ground, spaced about 30 feet apart, with 3 or 4 parallel lines of wire or cotton rope strung between them. This was the standard clothesline configuration before electric dryers became common household appliances. Monday was traditionally laundry day in most households, and the lines filled every week with sheets, work shirts, dungarees, and dishcloths pinned with spring-loaded wooden clips carried in a cloth bag that hung from the line itself. The smell of sheets dried in outdoor air on a warm afternoon is a specific sensory memory that many people who grew up with it can call back with unexpected clarity decades later. The electric clothes dryer became widely affordable in the 1960s, and the T-post lines began disappearing from backyards. Many municipalities have since restricted or banned outdoor clotheslines in certain zoning districts, completing the removal of something that was once as universal as a mailbox. Number 85. The root cellar. Long before the refrigerator made food storage a question of shelf organization, the American house was built with its own cold storage system dug directly into the earth. The root cellar was a partially or fully underground room, accessible from the basement stairs or through an exterior bulkhead door, where the surrounding soil kept the temperature cool and steady year-round. In most of the northern United States, a properly built root cellar stayed between 32 and 40 degrees in winter and held in the mid-50s through summer, with naturally high humidity that kept root vegetables from drying out and shriveling before spring. Families in the 19th and early 20th centuries stored their entire winter food supply there. Potatoes and turnips went in bins of damp sand, cabbages hung from the ceiling on their stems, apples and pears filled wooden barrels packed in dry leaves to slow ripening, onions and garlic hung in braided ropes from the ceiling joists. Carrots were layered in wooden boxes between sheets of damp sawdust. Canned goods from the summer's harvest filled shelves from floor to ceiling. In a productive year, a farm family's root cellar held enough food to last from October through March without a single trip to town. The smell of a working root cellar was specific and unmistakable. Cool earth, the sweetness of stored apples, the faint green sharpness of cabbages, and the dry, papery smell of onion skins. There was nothing else quite like it, and no refrigerator has ever come close to reproducing it. The electric refrigerator arrived in American homes in meaningful numbers during the 1930s and became nearly universal by the 1950s. Deep freezers completed the replacement in the post-war years. New construction stopped including root cellars entirely. Urban and suburban lots had no room for them, and the seasonal act of putting up food for winter, the canning and drying and storing that had organized the domestic calendar for generations, faded into a niche practice carried on by a diminishing number of rural households. Number 84. The front parlor. In the American home of the 19th and early 20th century, the front parlor was a room with a specific social purpose. It was kept for formal occasions, for receiving guests you didn't know well, for the minister's visit or the insurance agent's call, for laying out the family dead before burial, which happened at home until the funeral home industry made that its own business in the early 20th century. The parlor furniture was the household's best. The horsehair sofa nobody sat on during ordinary evenings, the china figurines arranged on the mantel, the family Bible open on the central table. Everyday family life happened in the kitchen and the sitting room at the back of the house. As American social customs loosened through the early 20th century and the informal living room replaced the parlor as the domestic standard, builders stopped including a separate formal room. The open floor plan layouts of post-war construction made the very idea of a room kept closed for company seem unnecessary. Number 83. The ash dump door. In the days when the household fireplace was used for heat rather than ambiance, it came with a practical feature built into the floor of the firebox, a small hinged iron door that opened onto a shaft leading down to an ash pit below the hearth. This was the ash dump. After the fire burned down overnight, you swept the cooled ashes through the opening and closed the door. The ash pit beneath accumulated the season's ash and needed to be emptied only a few times a year, accessed through a clean-out door in the basement wall. The alternative, a fireplace without an ash dump, required carrying ash out through the house in a metal pail, a task that left fine gray dust on every surface it passed. As decorative gas fireplaces replaced functional wood-burning ones in new construction through the mid-20th century, the ash dump disappeared with them. Number 82. Pocket doors. In the Victorian and Craftsman-era American home, the boundary between the parlor and the dining room was not a fixed wall, but a pair of wide, wooden panels that slid sideways into recesses in the flanking walls. These were pocket doors, and they solved an architectural problem that the standard hinged door has never fully addressed: how to close off a large opening without consuming the floor space that a swinging door requires. When the pocket doors were open, the parlor and dining room became a single large space for holidays and gatherings. When closed, each room became private without either door swinging into the furniture. The hardware was substantial: top-hung rollers riding on a steel track embedded in the header, with the weight of the door balanced so precisely that a well-built set could be moved with one finger. They appeared in new construction from roughly the 1880s through the 1920s and remained in craftsman homes through the 1930s. Number 81. Storm windows. Before double-pane insulated glass became the industry standard, every window in an American home was a single pane of glass set in a wood frame, and a single pane of glass is, thermally speaking, barely better than a hole in the wall. The solution was the storm window, a secondary frame, usually made of wood and later of aluminum, mounted on the exterior of the house over the primary window from fall through spring. Families installed them each October and removed them each April, storing the screens for winter and the storm windows for summer in a dedicated section of the garage or attic. The seasonal changeover was a standard household task, like stacking firewood or priming the furnace. Weather-tight double-pane windows arrived in residential construction through the late 1960s and 1970s, and with them the need for a second outer window frame disappeared. The aluminum combination storm and screen unit that appeared in the 1960s was a transitional solution that combined both functions in one frame. Number 80. The built-in breakfast nook. In kitchens of the 1920s through the 1950s, the breakfast nook was a standard feature of middle-class home construction, a built-in booth set into a corner or a bay window alcove, with bench seats on 2 or 3 sides and a fixed table between them. The design was borrowed directly from the railroad dining car and the diner counter, which Americans associated with efficient, cheerful eating. Sears, Roebuck & Company sold the complete breakfast nook as a ready-to-install kit in their home-building catalogs through the 1930s and 1940s. The booth seated 4 comfortably for breakfast, 6 in a tight pinch for Sunday dinner, and was understood as a complement to the formal dining room rather than a replacement for it. Kitchen design shifted through the 1960s toward open plans with movable furniture, and the built-in nook disappeared from new construction because it complicated flexibility. In older homes, it was often torn out during kitchen renovations to gain counter space. Number 79. The tin ceiling. From the 1880s through the 1930s, pressed tin ceiling panels were a standard finish material in American commercial buildings, parlors, dining rooms, and kitchen ceilings. They provided a decorative surface that could be painted, resisted moisture, and could be installed faster and for less money than traditional plaster with ornamental molding. The panels arrived in sheets, typically 2 feet by 4 feet, stamped with repeating geometric or floral patterns that, when assembled, created the impression of expensive plasterwork. Hardware stores and lumber yards stocked them as standard inventory. Sears sold them by mail. The pattern vocabulary was wide. You could buy something that resembled classical egg and dart molding or pressed rosettes, depending on the budget. Gypsum wallboard arrived as the dominant ceiling material after World War II, faster and cheaper to install and completely flat, making the pressed tin ceiling obsolete in new construction. Many were covered over with drywall during renovations. Number 78. The radiator cover. For much of the 20th century, the cast iron steam radiator was the most common heating unit in American homes north of the Mason-Dixon line. The radiators were utilitarian objects, heavy, ribbed, painted with silver or bronze, positioned below windows where they counteracted cold glass with a column of rising heat. In homes where the owners wanted the heating system to blend into the woodwork, a radiator cover was built, a wood-framed box with a decorative grill front that enclosed the unit and allowed heat to pass through while making it look like a piece of built-in furniture. Some covers doubled as window seats, others were simple cabinets with ornamental ironwork fronts. The shift to forced air furnaces through the post-war decades made steam radiators and their covers relics in new construction, though the radiators themselves stayed in service in older homes for decades longer. In the existing housing stock of northeastern cities, the cast iron radiators are still there. Number 77. The wringer washer on the back porch. Before automatic washing machines with built-in pumps and spin cycles became standard appliances, laundry was done on a machine that required active participation from start to finish. The wringer washer was a tub and motor unit that agitated clothes in soapy water but could not extract the water by itself. For that, it had the wringer, two rubber rollers mounted above the tub on a hinged arm. You fed each wet garment between the rollers, which squeezed out the water and deposited the flattened piece into a rinse tub on the other side. The process was warm, loud, and time-consuming. Because of the water involved, the machines lived on back porches or in basement laundry areas rather than in finished rooms. They were a fixture in American working class and farm households from the 1930s through the early 1960s. The fully automatic washing machine with its own spin cycle made the wringer obsolete. Number 76. The hand pump in the yard. In rural and small-town America through the early 20th century, many households drew water not from a pressurized municipal supply, but from a well in the yard, accessed through a cast iron hand pump mounted over the wellhead. The pump handle rose and fell with a characteristic squeal and thunk that carried across a quiet farmstead. A good pump could bring up a bucket of cold water from 30 or 40 feet down in less than a minute of steady pumping. In summer, the water arrived cold, enough to shock the wrists, beating the outside of the glass. Farms and rural households used hand pumps as their primary water source into the 1950s across much of the country. Even in homes that had acquired indoor plumbing, the yard pump often survived as a secondary source for garden watering or livestock. The expansion of rural electrification projects and municipal water systems gradually made private wells and hand pumps obsolete as primary sources. Number 75. The built-in kitchen step, stool. In kitchens of the early and mid-20th century, where cabinetry reached all the way to the ceiling and pantry shelves climbed higher than any adult could reach from the floor, many builders included a small step stool that pulled out from beneath the lower cabinets. Some versions were a single hinged step that dropped down from beneath a cabinet door. Others were a two-step fold-out unit stored flat inside a dedicated narrow bay beside the refrigerator alcove. Kitchen supply catalogs from the 1930s and 1940s listed the built-in step stool as a standard optional feature alongside the flour bin and the spice cabinet. As kitchen cabinets standardized to the 8-foot ceiling height in post-war construction and upper cabinets stopped reaching the full ceiling, the highest shelf came within standing reach, and the built-in step stool was simply omitted from plans. A freestanding wooden step stool took its place, and eventually the plastic folding step stool that turns up in nearly every American household today. Number 74. The kitchen pass-through. In American homes of the 1940s through the 1960s, before the open floor plan merged the kitchen and dining room into a single space, the two rooms were typically divided by a full wall. A practical feature of that era was the pass-through, a rectangular opening cut through the shared wall at counter height, wide enough to slide a casserole dish or a stack of plates from the kitchen side to a serving ledge on the dining room side. Some pass-throughs had a hinged wooden shutter that closed flush when not in use. Others had a folding shelf that doubled as a narrow breakfast bar with stools pulled up on the dining side. The pass-through let the cook stay in the kitchen without being cut off from conversation, and it reduced the number of trips around the wall during dinner service. The open floor plan kitchen eliminated the wall entirely, removing the pass-through's reason for being. Number 73. Built-in bookshelves flanking the fireplace. In the craftsman, colonial revival, and arts and crafts homes of the early 20th century, the living room fireplace was rarely treated as a standalone element. It was the organizing center of the room, and on either side of the chimney breast, builders routinely installed floor-to-ceiling shelving units with cabinets below and open shelves above, sometimes with a window seat tucked into the alcove at one end. The shelves were part of the architectural plan from the beginning, not added after the fact. They housed books, family photographs, a radio, and eventually a small television in a corner cubby that seemed made for it. In grander versions, leaded glass doors covered the lower cabinet sections. As post-war construction shifted to simpler framing and standardized room layouts, the fireplace alcove built-in became a custom feature rather than a standard inclusion. New construction dropped it to reduce costs. Homeowners renovating older houses now spend considerable money putting back exactly what the original builder included as a matter of course.
Number 72. The dedicated pantry.
Every house built before the electric refrigerator became standard included a dedicated pantry, and for good reason. Without a mechanical way to keep food cold, the management of a household's food supply required a separate room. The pantry was not a closet. It was a room, typically positioned between the kitchen and the dining room or off the back of the kitchen, with north or east-facing exterior walls to keep it naturally cool, shelves running floor to ceiling on all sides, and sometimes a small window that could be propped open to draw in cool night air. The lower shelves held crocks, barrels, and covered bins, lard in a ceramic crock, sugar in a covered tin, cornmeal in a barrel, vinegar in a stoneware jug. The middle shelves held the household's canned goods and preserves, arranged by type the way a small general store would organize its inventory. The upper shelves held the overflow and the seasonal items, the Christmas fruitcake, the extra bags of flour, the holiday china that came down once a year. A well-run pantry in a well-run household was essentially a private grocery store, maintained and restocked according to what the season and the market offered. The arrival of the refrigerator changed the pantry's purpose but didn't immediately eliminate it. Through the 1940s and 1950s, many households still maintained a pantry alongside their refrigerator, using it for dry goods and canned goods as they always had. But post-war kitchen design, which emphasized efficiency and the compact work triangle, began treating the pantry as wasted square footage. Architects folded its function into upper and lower cabinets along the kitchen walls. The walk-in pantry disappeared from new construction plans almost entirely by the 1960s. It reappears today as a premium feature in high-end custom homes, marketed as a luxury upgrade, which is a remarkable inversion of its original status as the most basic functional room a house could have. Number 71. The bread drawer. Before pre-sliced bread in wax paper bags became the household standard, homemade bread came out of the oven in loaves that needed a cool, ventilated place to rest and stay fresh. Many kitchens of the early and mid-20th century included a dedicated bread drawer, a deep pull-out drawer set into the lower cabinets, lined with tin or enameled steel, with small holes punched in the sides or a perforated bottom to allow air circulation. The ventilation kept the bread from going mushy, while the enclosure kept it from drying out. Some households kept a freestanding bread box on the counter instead, but in better-equipped kitchens the bread storage was built directly into the cabinetry as a matter of good design. As commercially sliced and packaged bread from Wonder Bread and its competitors became the dominant form in American homes through the 1930s and 1940s, the dedicated bread drawer became redundant. The wax paper bag managed freshness adequately on its own, and the bread drawer was repurposed or simply built over in kitchen renovations. Number 70. The recessed medicine cabinet. Until the late 20th century, the bathroom medicine cabinet was not a box hung on the surface of the wall, but a unit set into the wall itself, flush with the plaster, with mirrored doors that opened to reveal a shallow interior, about 3 inches deep, exactly the right depth for a row of medicine bottles, a safety razor, a tube of toothpaste, and a bottle of Listerine. The recess was built between 2 wall studs during original construction at face height above the sink. Virtually every bathroom built between the 1900s and the 1960s had one. The recessed cabinet used no floor space, no counter space, and took up no visual room when its mirrored door was closed, because its mirror was the bathroom's primary looking glass. As bathroom design shifted toward larger vanity mirrors, floating shelves, and separate storage units through the latter part of the 20th century, the recessed medicine cabinet began to be seen as inadequate rather than efficient. New construction often omitted it. Number 69. The built-in corner cupboard. In the dining rooms and parlors of American homes from the colonial era through the early 20th century, the corner cupboard was a standard architectural feature, a triangular or curved cabinet built directly into the corner of the room, with shelves above a lower enclosed cabinet and often glass-paned doors for displaying the household's china and glassware. It turned a corner that would otherwise be wasted into storage and display simultaneously. The construction was integral to the house, framed and plastered as part of the room's original finish rather than added as a piece of furniture. Colonial homes had them in plain pine. Craftsman and federal-style homes had them in painted wood with dental molding. As dining rooms became less formal through the mid-20th century and as open-plan layouts eliminated defined dining room corners entirely, the built-in corner cupboard disappeared from new residential construction. Today, it survives in older homes as one of the features most likely to be specifically mentioned in real estate listings alongside original hardwood floors and working fireplaces.
Number 68.
The window seat with storage. In homes built from the Victorian era through the Craftsman period, the bay window, or a deep window alcove, was rarely left as empty floor space. Builders typically installed a built-in bench with a hinged seat, the interior accessible by lifting the lid to reveal a storage compartment below, a perfect place for extra blankets, out-of-season clothing, or the household miscellany that accumulates faster than any closet can hold. The window seat appeared in living rooms, in bedrooms, in breakfast nooks, and in upstairs landing alcoves wherever the architecture offered a recess deep enough to sit in. The construction was integral. The bench was framed as part of the room, with plaster or paneled sides, and in most homes a cushion was made to fit the seat exactly. As post-war construction flattened window profiles to standard dimensions and eliminated bay alcoves as expensive complications in tract housing, the window seat stopped appearing in new homes. Number 67. The built-in dining room sideboard. The formal dining rooms of American homes from the late Victorian era through the 1940s almost always included a built-in sideboard, a low cabinet running along one wall, with drawers for silverware and linens, cabinet doors below for serving pieces, and a shelf or counter surface above for the dishes used during a formal meal. The sideboard was part of the room's millwork, matching the plate rail above and the wainscoting below, with the same wood finish and hardware as the rest of the dining room. It served a practical function during meals, providing a surface for hot dishes without crowding the table, and between meals it organized the dining room's contents without requiring a separate piece of furniture. As formal dining rooms gave way to open dining areas and eat-in kitchens through the post-war decades, the built-in sideboard disappeared from construction plans. Number 66. The flour bin. In American kitchens of the early 20th century, flour was purchased in 25 or 50-pound sacks and stored in a dedicated bin built directly into the kitchen furniture. The flour bin appeared most often in the Hoosier cabinet, a freestanding kitchen work center produced by several Indiana manufacturers beginning in the 1890s and reaching peak popularity in the 1910s and 1920s. The Hoosier's built-in bin held up to 50 pounds and was equipped with a sifter at the bottom that deposited a measured amount directly onto the work surface below, eliminating the need to scoop flour into a separate sifter before baking. A household that baked bread daily, which was most American households until commercially sliced bread arrived in force, used the flour bin constantly. As commercial bread purchases displaced home baking through the 1930s and 1940s, and as built-in cabinetry replaced freestanding kitchen furniture, the dedicated flour bin disappeared. Number 65. The pie safe. In the American kitchen before mechanical refrigeration, a perforated tin cabinet, called a pie safe, stood in a cool corner, doing the work of keeping baked goods and cooked foods safe from insects while allowing enough air circulation to prevent mold. The pie safe was a simple wood-framed cabinet, 2 to 4 feet wide, with its door and side panels fitted with tin sheets punched in decorative patterns, stars, circles, and geometric designs that allowed ventilation while keeping flies out. A fresh pie, a leftover roast, or a bowl of rendered lard could sit in a pie safe for a day or two in a cool kitchen without spoiling. The craft of punching the tin panels was a household skill, and older pie safes show considerable variation in the patterns their makers chose. The refrigerator made the pie safe redundant, and most were discarded, pushed to barn storage, or broken apart for their tin. Number 64. The speaking tube. In multi-story houses of the 19th and early 20th century, before electric intercoms and telephone extensions, communicating between floors was accomplished through a low-tech solution that worked remarkably well, a metal tube, usually about an inch in diameter, running inside the wall from one floor to another, with a mouthpiece and earpiece fitting at each end. To use it, you removed a plug from the mouthpiece, blew into the tube to alert the person at the other end, and then spoke. The tube carried the human voice with surprising clarity through walls and floors without any electrical component. Speaking tubes connected kitchens to dining rooms, first floors to servants' quarters, and captains' cabins to engine rooms on vessels of every size. In domestic use, they let the mistress of the house summon help from the kitchen without leaving the parlor. The household telephone made them redundant in most homes by the 1920s, and the tubes were capped off inside the walls where they remain today in hundreds of older houses, sealed and forgotten. Number 63. The servant call bell system. In middle-class and well-appointed American homes of the 19th and early 20th century, a network of wires ran through the walls connecting every principal room to a central panel in the kitchen. In each room, a small porcelain push-button was set into the wall near the fireplace or the doorframe. When pressed, it rang a specific bell on the kitchen panel, with each bell labeled for its room: parlor, master bedroom, dining room, library. The bell panel was a horizontal row of small coil spring bells, each ringing at a slightly different pitch so an experienced servant could identify the room without looking at the labels. The earliest versions operated on a pull-wire mechanism requiring no electricity. Electric versions followed in the early 1900s. As domestic service employment declined through the 1920s and 1930s, and most middle-class families stopped employing household staff, the system became obsolete. Number 62. The back staircase. In houses of a certain size built through the early 20th century, there were two sets of stairs. The main staircase rising from the front entry hall, wider and more ornately finished, and the back staircase connecting the kitchen to the upstairs hallway through a narrow enclosed passage at the rear of the house. The back staircase was the working stairs. Household staff used it to move between floors without crossing the main living areas. Children used it to reach the kitchen from their bedrooms without disturbing the front of the house. Laundry went down it. Firewood for the bedroom grates went up it. The construction was deliberately plain, unfinished pine treads, simple square balusters, a bare handrail. As domestic service disappeared from American middle-class homes, and as houses shrank to sizes where a single staircase served all purposes, the back stairs were eliminated in new construction or converted to general utility access. Number 61. The hired help's room. In American homes of the 19th and early 20th century, even households of modest means often employed at least one domestic servant, and the house was designed to include a small room for that person, typically positioned off the kitchen, above the garage, or at the back of the upper floor near the service stairs. The room was small: a single bed, a dresser, a chair, sometimes a narrow closet. It was heated separately or not at all, its window looking out over the backyard rather than the street. The room's proximity to the kitchen was deliberate, minimizing the servant's movement through the main living areas. As wages rose and domestic service employment declined through the 1920s and 1930s, the live-in servant became less common in middle-class households, and her room became a guest room, a sewing room, or a home office. Number 60. The floored attic. Before self-storage facilities appeared on every commercial strip, and before the two-car garage became the household storage unit by default, the house itself provided long-term storage in its attic. Not the spray foam insulated attic space of modern construction, accessible only by crawling, but a finished floored space with a proper pull-down stair or a fixed staircase, enough headroom to stand at the ridge, and planked flooring covering the entire footprint of the house below. A floored attic held the out-of-season clothing, the holiday decorations, the spare furniture, the trunks of family papers, and the accumulated objects of decades of domestic life. Every family with an older house knew the particular quality of a floored attic on a summer afternoon. Hot pine boards, dust, the faint smell of cedar and camphor, cardboard boxes darkened with age at the fold lines. As insulation requirements increased through the second half of the 20th century, the attic was either insulated to the point of inaccessibility or converted into a livable floor with dormers and finished walls. Number 59. The basement cold room. Distinct from the separate root cellar structure, many American homes of the 19th and early 20th century included a dedicated cold room in a corner of the basement. An interior room with masonry walls, no heating source, and a small vent to the outside, designed to stay near refrigerator temperatures through the winter and cool through most of the year. This was the fruit cellar, the canning corner, or simply the cold room, depending on the household and the region. Its shelves held the summer's canning, rows of quart jars containing tomatoes, corn, green beans, peaches, and pickles put up in August and September for use through winter and spring. A well-stocked basement cold room was a reliable measure of a household's preparedness for the season ahead. Central heating that extended to the full basement floor eliminated the temperature differential that made these rooms useful. Once the basement stayed at room temperature year-round, the cold room became just another storage space, its purpose superseded by the refrigerator and the deep freezer upstairs. Number 58. The summer kitchen. In the American farmhouse and in many townhouses through the late 19th century, there was a second kitchen detached from or loosely attached to the main house at the back, the summer kitchen. The logic was plain. In an era when cooking was done over a wood or coal range, operating the kitchen through the summer months meant heating the entire house to punishing temperatures on days when the outdoor air was already in the 90s. The summer kitchen moved that heat outside. It was a separate small building, sometimes a lean-to addition joined to the back of the house, sometimes a freestanding structure reached by a covered walkway. Its stove was positioned to vent directly to the outside air. Its floor was typically brick or packed earth rather than finished wood, because open hearth cooking produced sparks and grease that could set a wooden floor burning. The summer kitchen was also where the messiest preservation work of the household calendar happened. The boiling water bath for canning, the lard rendering after hog slaughter, the soap making from wood ash and tallow, the butchering of chickens. These were tasks that produced steam, smoke, strong smells, and considerable disorder, and keeping them out of the main house was as much about domestic order as about staying cool. Some summer kitchens were substantial structures with their own pantry shelves, a woodpile alcove, and a dry goods cabinet. Others were as simple as a shed with a stovepipe hole cut through the roof. By the early 20th century, as gas ranges began replacing wood-burning stoves, and as screened windows and electric fans made summer heat more manageable inside, the detached summer kitchens started disappearing. Many were demolished. Others were absorbed into the main house as utility rooms or mud rooms when the kitchen behind them was remodeled. By mid-century, the summer kitchen had become a rural artifact, still in use on farms that operated as they had a generation earlier, but invisible in the new residential construction spreading across the American landscape. Number 57. The gravity furnace. Before forced air furnaces with electric blowers became the standard residential heating system, many American homes were heated by a coal or wood furnace in the basement that distributed warm air through the house by convection alone, no fan required. The furnace itself was a large cast iron unit, sometimes called an octopus furnace for the heavy round ducts that radiated from its top in all directions. These ducts rose through the floor above and delivered warm air through large floor registers in each room, positioned at the center of the floor or at the base of interior walls. The system worked on simple physics. Warm air rises. There were no motors to fail and no filters to replace. The furnace required stoking with coal several times a day and produced substantial amounts of ash. Forced air systems with electric blowers and the ability to run on natural gas or fuel oil replaced the gravity furnace through the 1950s and 1960s, offering more even heat distribution and far less daily maintenance. Number 56. The cistern. Before municipal water systems reached every American household, many homes stored their own water supply in a cistern, a sealed underground tank, usually brick-lined or concrete, positioned beneath the kitchen or in the yard, filled by rainwater collected from the roof through gutters and downspouts. The cistern served as a gravity-fed supplemental supply for laundry, bathing, and garden use. Rainwater was considered softer and better for washing hair and linens than well water, which was often hard with dissolved minerals. Cisterns ranged in size from a few hundred gallons on small city lots to several thousand gallons on farms where they served as the primary water source through dry months. A hand pump in the kitchen drew water up from the cistern below. Municipal water service, expanding through American towns and cities in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, made the cistern redundant in urban areas. In rural areas, it remained in active use considerably longer. Number 55. The outhouse. Rural and small-town America kept its outdoor privy longer than most history books suggest. Indoor plumbing reached American cities through the early decades of the 20th century, but in rural areas without municipal sewage systems, the outhouse remained the household toilet well into the mid-20th century. The structure was simple, a small wooden shed built over a dug pit, with a wooden seat inside, and, in better appointed versions, a small ventilation opening cut into the door, and a supply of catalog pages or cut newsprint. Outhouses were positioned far enough from the house to keep conditions manageable and downwind when the lot permitted. The Works Progress Administration constructed thousands of improved sanitary privies across rural America in the 1930s as part of its public health efforts. Rural electrification programs and the expansion of affordable septic systems made indoor plumbing accessible to farm families through the 1940s and 1950s. Number 54. The carriage house. Before the automobile, the horse-drawn carriage was the middle-class household's primary transportation, and it required a dedicated outbuilding. The carriage house stood at the back of the lot or at the end of the driveway, a two-story structure with the ground floor holding the carriage or buggy and a harness room where leather tack was cleaned and stored, and the loft above holding hay and feed for the horse stabled in the adjacent stall. The carriage house was built to the same standard as the main house, often in matching materials and architectural detail. It required daily attention in a way that a parked car does not. The transition from horse-drawn to motorized vehicles between roughly 1910 and 1930 converted carriage houses to garages, which most of them remain today in older urban neighborhoods. In cities with alley systems, the carriage house became the garage accessed from the rear, a conversion so natural that the buildings survived in large numbers. Number 53. The storm cellar. Across the Great Plains, the Midwest, and the South, the exterior storm cellar was as standard a feature of rural homesteads as the front porch or the kitchen garden. It was a separate underground structure, usually concrete or stone, positioned near the house and accessed by a slanted double door set into a low mound of earth. The interior was typically a single room barely large enough for a family to sit in, with a dirt or concrete floor, a wooden bench along one wall, and a single bare bulb if the property had electricity. A flashlight, matches, and sometimes a battery radio sat on the shelf beside the door. When the storm siren sounded, or the sky turned the particular green color that families on the plains learned to recognize, you ran to the cellar and pulled the doors shut overhead. Families that grew up on plains farms in the mid-20th century could navigate to the storm cellar in the dark without thinking. Number 52. The rain barrel. Before outdoor water spigots became standard on every American home, and before rubber garden hoses were available at every hardware store, many households caught and stored rainwater from the roof in a barrel set beneath a downspout. The rain barrel was typically a repurposed wooden cask from a cooperage or a cider press, positioned where it could collect the runoff from a single downspout, and its water was used for watering kitchen gardens, washing windows, and providing the soft water that washerwomen preferred for laundry. In dry regions, a row of barrels might be placed under multiple downspouts around the house, providing a reserve for garden irrigation through the summer. Municipal water service with outdoor spigots and the wider availability of rubber hoses and lawn sprinklers made the rain barrel redundant for most households by the mid-20th century. Number 51. The backyard incinerator. Before curbside trash collection became a universal municipal service, and before landfill disposal was the standard endpoint for household waste, American families burned their garbage at home. The backyard incinerator was a simple device, a steel or brick cylinder, typically about 3 feet tall and 18 inches across, with vents around the base for airflow and a hinged grate at the bottom for ash removal. It sat on a concrete pad or bare earth in the back corner of the yard, well away from fences and overhanging branches. Household paper, cardboard, food scraps, and yard waste went in and burned down to a small volume of ash that could be spread in the garden. The faint, sharp smell of a burning incinerator on a cool morning was a background condition of mid-20th century American neighborhoods, noted by nobody in particular because it was simply part of how things were done. Air quality regulations beginning in California in the late 1950s and spreading across the country through the 1960s progressively banned residential backyard burning. Number 50. The plate rail. In dining rooms of American homes from roughly the 1880s through the 1930s, a narrow wooden shelf ran around the perimeter of the room at a height of about a foot below the ceiling, supported by small wooden brackets and finished to match the room's trim. This was the plate rail, and it held the household's decorative plates, serving platters, and framed pictures at a height that put them safely above daily activity while keeping them visible. The plate rail appeared in Victorian dining rooms, craftsman kitchens, and bungalow parlors alike, varying in width and ornamental detail according to the style of the house. It served a purpose that predated dedicated china cabinets, displaying the household's better pieces where they could be seen and admired without occupying the table or the sideboard. As dining room ceilings dropped in height in new post-war construction, and as open wall space gave way to built-in cabinetry, the plate rail disappeared from the architectural vocabulary of the American home. Number 49. The butler's pantry. In well-appointed homes of the late Victorian and Edwardian eras, the passage between the kitchen and the formal dining room was not a simple doorway but a dedicated staging room. It was a narrow, fully fitted space, typically 4 to 6 feet wide and 8 to 12 feet long, lined on both sides with upper and lower cabinets for china, glassware, and silverware, with a counter running the full length of one wall for arranging dishes and staging a formal meal's courses before they went to the table. A small sink was often set into the counter for rinsing glasses. The butler's pantry kept the organized activity of serving dinner entirely out of sight of both the kitchen and the dining room guests. As formal dinner service declined through the mid-20th century, and as open-plan kitchens made meal service more casual, the butler's pantry disappeared from new residential construction. Number 48. Functional wooden window shutters. The shutters on most American houses today are purely decorative. Narrow vinyl panels screwed flat against the siding, too small to cover the glass, and with no hardware to close. The Grote original version was a working tool. Functional wooden shutters were full-width panels hinged to the window frame, built to fold over and latch across the glass. In summer, they could be angled to block direct sun while letting air through their louvered slats. In hurricanes and winter storms, they could be latched shut to protect the glass entirely. Every house in hurricane-prone coastal areas and in the pre-air conditioning South, built before roughly the 1950s, had working shutters as standard equipment. as aluminum and vinyl windows with built-in screens and thermal glass replaced wooden windows through the post-war decades. Working shutters became obsolete as a weather tool. Number 47. The hall tree. The first piece of furniture encountered in the American home from roughly the 1850s through the early 20th century was a tall multi-purpose unit positioned just inside the front door, the hall tree. It combined a coat rack with hooks at standing height, a small bench at the bottom, with a hinged lid that opened to a storage compartment for umbrellas or overshoes, and usually an oval mirror in the center for a last look before going out. Many versions included a small shelf for calling cards, gloves, and keys. The hall tree organized the daily entry ritual of the household, the routine of arriving and departing, in a piece of furniture designed around exactly that purpose. As front entry closets became standard in new construction, and as the formal social rituals that calling cards and announced visitors once organized gave way to more casual arrangements, the hall tree moved from necessary to old-fashioned. Number 46. Wainscoting. In the American home of the Victorian and Craftsman eras, walls were not painted from baseboard to ceiling as a single surface. The lower third of the wall, from the floor to about waist or shoulder height, was treated as a separate zone, framed in a chair rail molding above and a baseboard below, and filled with wood paneling, tongue and groove boards, or raised panel sections painted a contrasting color. This was wainscoting, and it served both decorative and practical purposes. The lower wall took the most damage in daily household life. Chair backs, children, moving furniture, and doorknob contact all damaged it regularly. A wood-paneled lower wall was more durable and easier to repair than plaster or wallpaper. In the hallways and stairways of older homes, wainscoting protected the wall surface through decades of hard use. As drywall replaced plaster and as residential interiors simplified through the mid-20th century, wainscoting disappeared from standard construction. Number 45. The entry vestibule. In an American house built before central heating, the front door was not just an entrance, it was a critical element in the building's thermal management. Opening the front door directly into the main hall let cold winter air rush in and displace the heated air inside. The solution was the vestibule, a small enclosed chamber between the exterior door and the interior door to the hallway, typically no larger than a coat closet and floor area, with room for 2 people to stand. When you entered from outside, you stepped into the vestibule, closed the outer door behind you, stamped the snow from your boots, removed your coat, and only then opened the inner door to the warm house. The vestibule acted as an airlock, preventing the direct exchange of cold outside air and warm inside air every time someone crossed the threshold. Beyond the thermal function, the vestibule served as a social staging area. Visitors waited there while someone went to announce their arrival. Unexpected callers could be received at the inner door without being fully admitted to the house. In urban row houses, the vestibule often had hooks for visitors' coats, a narrow bench, and a decorative tile floor that could tolerate boots without damaging the main entry hall beyond. Mail came through a slot in the outer door and fell onto the vestibule floor. The umbrella stand lived there. By the post-war years, as central heating systems became more efficient, and as the social rituals the vestibule organized, the formal caller, the announced visit, began to disappear from daily life. New construction eliminated it. Weather stripping on a single exterior door and a storm door did most of the thermal work instead. The vestibule disappeared from new residential construction through the 1950s and 1960s, though it survives in virtually every older city house and apartment building where it was original, still doing exactly the job it was built to do. Number 44. The screened side porch. Distinct from the sleeping porch upstairs and the social front porch facing the street, the screened side or back porch was a seasonal living room, a fully enclosed outdoor space with screen panels on 3 sides, a ceiling overhead, and enough room for a rocking chair, a card table, and a summer supper for 4. This was where families ate dinner in June and July when the kitchen was too hot. Children did homework at the card table on August afternoons. A ceiling fan and the cross breeze through the screens made the porch livable on most summer nights without mechanical cooling. The screened porch appeared on homes across the South and Midwest from the early 1900s onward and remained a standard inclusion in new construction through the 1950s. As central air conditioning became common in residential construction from the 1960s onward, the screened porch shifted from necessary to optional. New housing developments began omitting it to reduce construction costs. Number 43. The coal bin. Distinct from the coal chute that delivered the fuel into the house, the coal bin was the masonry enclosure in the basement corner where the coal actually lived. It was typically a three-sided masonry structure positioned directly beneath the chute opening, sized to hold several tons delivered in a single fall load. Its walls were solid to contain the coal dust and the weight of the pile. A wooden gate at the front allowed the furnace tender to shovel coal out toward the boiler as needed. In households that heated with coal, the bin was filled once in autumn and drawn down through winter, the depth of the remaining pile serving as a rough measure of how cold the season had been. As oil and gas furnaces replaced coal heat through the 1950s and 1960s, coal bins were emptied, swept out, and converted to general storage. Number 42. The linen press. In American homes of the 19th and early 20th century, bed and table linens were a household investment that required dedicated storage. The linen press was either a built-in closet with deep shelves designed specifically for folded sheets, tablecloths, and napkins, or a freestanding wardrobe-like cabinet with the same purpose. The built-in version appeared in the upstairs hall of better-constructed homes, positioned near the bedrooms it served, with wide shelves spaced for folded sheets and narrower shelves for smaller items. Linens were folded precisely and stacked in order, often with lavender sachets placed between the folded layers. The linen press was a measure of household organization. A well-maintained one indicated a household that took its domestic standards seriously. As homes shrank in average size through the mid-20th century, and as synthetic fabrics requiring less careful storage became common, the dedicated linen press gave way to a shelf in the hall closet and eventually to a shelf in the bathroom cabinet. Number 41. The icebox alcove. Before the electric refrigerator became a standard kitchen appliance, the icebox was a large insulated cabinet, 2 to 3 feet wide and 4 to 5 feet tall, that occupied a significant section of kitchen floor space. Homes designed during the peak icebox era, roughly the 1890s through the 1920s, sometimes included a dedicated alcove, a bay, recessed space in the kitchen wall exactly sized to hold the unit, with the ice delivery door in the exterior wall just behind it. The alcove kept the icebox from protruding into the kitchen work area and provided thermal benefit from the masonry walls on 3 sides. When electric refrigerators became affordable through the 1930s, the icebox alcoves were repurposed to hold the new appliance, then gradually lost their specific dimensioning as refrigerators grew larger and moved to freestanding positions in the cabinet line. In older homes, the outline of the alcove is sometimes still visible in the kitchen wall, its depth now occupied by a modern refrigerator that fits by coincidence rather than design. Number 40. The basement as working floor. The basement of the mid-20th century American house was not primarily a finished recreation room. It was a working space that organized the household's most physically demanding activities below grade, where they couldn't disturb the living areas above. In a well-organized household of the 1930s through the 1950s, the basement held the furnace and coal bin in one corner, the laundry area with its concrete tubs and wringer washer along one wall, the canning and cold storage shelves in a cool north corner, and the workbench with its vise and tool rack on another wall. The sounds of a well-used basement, the rhythmic thump of the wringer, the scrape of a coal shovel, the smell of laundry soap and hot metal, were as characteristic of the mid-century home as the television playing upstairs. The finished basement, arriving as an aspiration of post-war prosperity, changed this relationship. Converting the basement to a recreation room demonstrated that the household no longer required it as a production space. Number 39. The crank doorbell. The electric doorbell beside every front door today was preceded by a mechanical version requiring no electricity, the twist crank doorbell. The mechanism was simple, a small iron or brass housing mounted beside the door containing a spring and a bell. The visitor gripped the protruding key or knob and turned it sharply, winding the spring, which released and struck the bell repeatedly in a rapid ratcheting ring. The sound was louder and more insistent than a modern electric chime, carrying through a house easily, even from the back rooms. Crank doorbells appeared in American homes from the mid-19th century onward and were standard on new construction into the early electric era. Battery-powered and then wired electric doorbells arrived by the 1910s and 1920s and became the new standard by mid-century. The crank version survived on older homes long after it stopped appearing in new construction, its brass housing eventually painted over along with the rest of the trim, the knob still turnable by anyone curious enough to try it. Number 38. The letter slot. Before the steel mailbox became the postal standard beside every front door, letters were delivered directly through the door via a slotted opening fitted with a hinged cover plate that swung shut by gravity. The letter slot was a horizontal rectangular opening, typically about 10 inches wide and 2 inches tall. Its brass or iron cover pushed inward by the carrier's hand and falling closed behind each delivery. Mail dropped to the floor of the entry hall below, collected whenever someone came through. In neighborhoods of closely spaced row houses, the letter slot allowed carriers to move along the full block without stepping onto each porch, maintaining a fast and consistent pace. The curbside mailbox and the postal regulations that standardized delivery procedures gradually pushed the letter slot toward obsolescence in detached residential housing. In most jurisdictions, postal regulations now require a porch-mounted or curbside box for residential delivery. The letter slot remains in active use on urban row houses, brownstones, and older detached homes in dense neighborhoods where the original delivery infrastructure never changed. Number 37. Wooden Venetian blinds. The metal Venetian blind that appeared in offices and homes from the 1940s onward was a direct descendant of an older and heavier version standard in American homes since the 19th century, the wooden Venetian blind. The slats were thin strips of basswood or pine, typically 1.5 inches wide, held by fabric tape and cotton cord, adjusted and tilted by exactly the same mechanism as the metal version that replaced them, but the materials gave them a different quality entirely. They were heavier, warmer in appearance, and produced a specific sound when tilted that no metal blind has ever matched. Wooden Venetian blinds filtered afternoon light in a distinctive way, casting horizontal bars of sun and shadow across a room that owners and guests alike found pleasant. They appeared in parlors, libraries, and bedroom windows throughout the mid-century American home. Light aluminum and steel blinds became available in the late 1930s, far less expensive to manufacture, and the wooden version retreated to specialty production. Number 36. Canvas roller window shades. Before cellular shades and motorized blinds, the standard window covering in the American bedroom and living room was a canvas or heavy cotton roller shade, a rectangular panel of coated fabric rolled onto a spring-loaded wooden dowel at the top of the window, lowered by pulling a ring at the bottom and released with a slight tug that sent it rolling back up. The spring mechanism worked on tension, too little, and the shade fell open on its own, too much, and it snapped up with a sharp crack at the lightest touch. Getting the tension right was a standard household skill passed without ceremony from one resident to the next. The shades came in off-white or dark green, and in some households were painted with a decorative border along the bottom. They were inexpensive, effective, and completely repairable at home with a screwdriver and a few minutes. Number 35. The built-in range alcove. In kitchens of the late 19th and early 20th century, the cooking range was a heavy fixed appliance, and many kitchens were designed to receive it. A dedicated masonry alcove precisely sized for the range on 3 enclosed sides, with a vent connection at the back and a tile or brick surround on the visible faces. The alcove focused the range's heat toward the cooking surface and protected the surrounding walls from constant direct exposure. In farmhouse kitchens, the alcove was often substantial, with a wide tile hearth at the base, open shelves for pots and spice jars on either side, and a warming shelf above. As gas ranges replaced wood and coal stoves through the early 20th century, and as freestanding ranges on 4 legs became standard equipment, the fixed masonry alcove became an inconvenient permanent installation in kitchens being redesigned around flexible appliance placement. Number 34. The built-in spice cabinet. In kitchens of the early and mid-20th century, spices were kept in a shallow built-in cabinet, typically 2 to 3 inches deep and about 12 inches wide, recessed into the wall beside the range or mounted above the stove at eye level. The depth was carefully proportioned, just enough for a single row of standard spice tins and glass bottles, making everything immediately visible without reaching past other items. The cabinet had a small wooden door that closed flush with the wall. The tins inside were often distinctively designed by their manufacturers. The red McCormick tins, the yellow Durkee jars, each brand recognizable at a glance. As kitchen design standardized to uniform cabinet runs in new construction, and as the shallow depth required for a spice cabinet conflicted with the standard 12-inch upper cabinet depth, the dedicated built-in spice cabinet was absorbed into the general upper cabinet. Storage. Number 33. The mudroom. Before the mudroom was marketed as a premium feature in new construction, it was simply the back entry, a small room at the back door where the day's outdoor work was deposited before entering the house. Work boots came off here. Overalls hung on the hooks beside the door. Rain gear dripped onto the linoleum floor. A utility sink let you scrub garden dirt from your hands before touching the kitchen. The room was called the back hall, the back porch, or simply the entry. It absorbed the transition between outdoor life and indoor life, keeping the evidence of the day's work from reaching the rooms the household actually lived in. The functional components were basic: coat hooks at several heights, a shelf for hats, a bench for removing boots, and a floor that could be mopped. The term mudroom emerged as a marketing phrase only after the feature became fashionable to advertise in new construction catalogs. Number 32. The detached single-car garage. The standard residential garage in American housing from the 1920s through the early post-war period was not attached to the house. It stood at the end of the driveway, separated from the main structure by 10 or 15 feet of yard, a single-car structure with a swinging double door that you pulled shut after driving in. The separation was partly practical. Early gasoline-powered automobiles leaked fuel and produced fumes, making it inadvisable to house one against the sleeping quarters. The detached garage also provided modest fire protection, containing an automotive fire away from the residence itself. As car ownership expanded after World War II, and as the two-car family became a suburban standard through the 1950s and 1960s, the attached two-car garage became the dominant form in new residential construction. The detached single-car garage, present on nearly every pre-war street, became a holdover feature of the older housing stock, recognizable now as a historical detail of neighborhoods built before the automobile fully reorganized the American house around itself. Number 31. The cellar bulkhead. In American homes with full basements, particularly those built before the mid-20th century in the Northeast and Midwest, a slanted exterior access door was standard. A pair of metal or wood panels set into a low concrete surround at grade level along the foundation wall, opening onto a staircase leading directly down to the basement floor. The Bilco Company became so closely associated with these doors that the term Bilco door entered the American vocabulary as a generic name for the type regardless of manufacturer. The bulkhead allowed large items, coal, lumber, appliances, and contractor equipment to move in and out of the basement without navigating the interior stairs. It also provided an emergency exit during a tornado or fire. As attached garages became standard in new construction, and as basements transitioned from production and storage spaces to finished living areas, the exterior bulkhead door became less common in new builds. Number 30. The front porch. It needs to be understood as what it actually was, because calling it a design feature understates what it meant in the American residential landscape for nearly a century. The front porch was the primary venue for social life in the American neighborhood from the end of the Civil War through roughly the Second World War. It was where families sat in the evening after dinner, visible to the street, available to neighbors, positioned precisely at the boundary between private household life and the public life of the block. In neighborhoods of closely spaced houses, a front porch puts you close enough to the house across the street for a comfortable conversation without raising your voice. You knew your neighbors because you saw them on their porches. You knew when something was wrong in a house down the block because the porch was empty for too many evenings in a row. The social architecture of the neighborhood was organized around the assumption that people would spend warm evenings sitting outside in front of their houses, visible, accessible, and connected to the street. Builders understood this without being told. Craftsman bungalows typically had a wide covered porch running the full width of the house front, deep enough for a swing, a pair of rocking chairs, and a small table. Victorian homes had wraparound porches that moved you through morning sun on the east side to afternoon shade on the west. Even modest frame houses had a stoop with a roof over it and enough space for 2 chairs. The porch was not expensive relative to the rest of the house, and it was not considered optional. The forces that ended the porch era are well documented. Television drew families inside in the early 1950s. Air conditioning made the inside comfortable on summer nights. The car moved the center of neighborhood activity away from the sidewalk and toward the driveway. Number 29. The kitchen garden. For most of American residential history, a household that had a yard also had a kitchen garden. The vegetable plot was not a hobby or a back-to-nature gesture. It was part of the household's food supply. A family with a quarter-acre lot in a small Midwestern town in 1935 typically maintained a garden of several hundred square feet, producing tomatoes, beans, cucumbers, corn, squash, and greens through the summer months. The produce went to the table immediately and into the fruit cellar as canning for winter. The garden was tended primarily by the women and children of the household as a matter of domestic necessity, organized alongside the rest of the household calendar. As supermarkets expanded through the post-war decades, and as fresh vegetables became available year-round at low prices, the kitchen garden shifted from a necessity to an option. Suburban lots shrank and were devoted to grass. The time required to maintain a productive garden became harder to justify when the store offered the same produce without the labor. Number 28. The root vegetable bin under the stairs. In the kitchens and back entries of older American homes, particularly farmhouses and working-class houses with limited basement space, the compartment beneath the kitchen stairs was frequently fitted out as a root vegetable storage area rather than a coat closet. The space, with its cool masonry walls and its separation from the heated kitchen above, offered natural cold storage conditions close to ideal for potatoes, turnips, beets, carrots, and onions. A simple wooden bin or a series of shelves lined the interior, and the produce came in from the garden in fall and was drawn down through winter as needed. The bin required no refrigeration, no electricity, and minimal construction: a door, a shelf, and a cool floor in the darkest corner of the kitchen. Number 27. The exterior window box. From the early 20th century through mid-century, the window box, a long, narrow planter mounted beneath a front window, was standard exterior decoration in American neighborhoods. Window boxes appeared on bungalows, colonial homes, farmhouses, and urban row houses, planted each spring with geraniums, petunias, or trailing vines that softened the house facade toward the street. The boxes were painted wood, prone to rotting at the bottom and requiring replacement every several years, filled with potting soil and plants from the local nursery or hardware store. They were associated with houses that were cared for and with blocks that maintained their appearance. As vinyl siding covered original window trim in post-war renovations, and as the social meaning attached to visible residential horticulture shifted, the window box declined as a standard feature of domestic exteriors. New construction rarely includes them. They appear today primarily in historic districts or on houses where owners have deliberately restored the original character, a category of homeowner that barely existed until recently. Number 26. The attic sleeping room. In older American homes where the family needed to accommodate more people than the standard bedroom layout provided, the finished attic served as sleeping quarters. A bedroom under the rafters, reached by the back staircase, or a narrow pull-down stair with a slanted ceiling, a single window in a dormer, and enough floor space for a cot and a small dresser. This was where the oldest children slept when they outgrew sharing a room with younger siblings. It was where the occasional boarder lived who paid a weekly rate for room and board. On farms, it was where the hired hand slept. The attic bedroom was hot in summer and cold in winter, the last space to be heated and the first to lose heat, and the people assigned to it occupied it without complaint because there was nowhere else to put them. Number 25. The dedicated sewing room. In the American household of the 19th and early 20th century, a woman who managed a house without access to a sewing machine and a space to use it was at a significant disadvantage. Clothing wore out and was repaired rather than replaced. Children's garments were made from scratch or remade from adult clothing that had outlasted its first owner. Curtains, slipcovers, and household linens were sewn at home. The dedicated sewing room or sewing alcove, sometimes a full room off the upstairs hall, and sometimes a windowed corner of a bedroom, held the treadle or electric machine, the cutting table, the dress form, the thread cabinet, and the deep drawers of fabric sorted by type. In middle-class homes, the sewing room was a standard provision, as ready-to-wear clothing became affordable and universal through the mid-20th century, and as the cost of new garments dropped below the cost of the time required to make them, home sewing shifted from a household necessity to an optional hobby. Number 24. The clawfoot bathtub. The freestanding cast-iron bathtub on 4 feet, finished in white enamel inside and painted on the exterior, was the standard bathroom fixture in American homes from the 1880s through roughly the 1920s. It stood on its own in the center of the bathroom floor or along a wall, accessible from all 4 sides, heavy enough that once placed it rarely moved again. The claw feet, typically in a ball and claw or lion's paw style, were cast separately and bolted to the tub body. The water supply came from a standing faucet set on the rim or through a wall-mounted fixture above. Clawfoot tubs had no surrounding tile and no shower curtain rod. Bathing was a bath, not a shower, and the room was organized around the assumption that you sat down in the water to wash. The built-in alcove tub, enclosed on 3 sides and paired with an overhead shower, replaced the freestanding clawfoot through the 1930s and 1940s as bathroom designs standardized and production costs fell. Number 23. The matched bathroom hardware set. In the American bathroom of the mid-20th century, the soap dish, toothbrush holder, tumbler holder, and towel bar were not afterthoughts selected from a rack at the hardware store. They were a matched set, built into the wall in tile or ceramic at the time of construction, integral to the bathroom's finish the way the light fixture and the medicine cabinet were integral. The set was installed at the tile setter's visit and grouted into the wall permanently. Soap dishes were recessed into the shower wall at a specific height. Double towel bars were mounted on the longest wall at measured intervals. Toothbrush holders were set into the tile above the sink, each hole sized for a specific brush diameter. The entire configuration was planned before the first tile went up. Post-war bathroom construction began treating these accessories as changeable consumer items, surface-mounted with screws and replaceable without disturbing the wall. The built-in ceramic hardware set, which had made the bathroom feel finished and permanent, disappeared from new construction. Number 22. The pull-chain ceiling light. Before wall switches and electrical codes requiring switched fixtures at room entries became standard, the light in many American rooms was turned on and off by a chain or cord that hung directly from the fixture in the center of the ceiling. In kitchens, basements, attics, and back rooms throughout homes built before the 1930s and 1940s, the pull chain was the switch. You entered the room, reached up for the chain in the dark, pulled it, and the light came on. In attics and basements, the chain was sometimes extended with a length of cord, so you didn't have to find the fixture's own chain. The particular sound of a pull chain light, a quiet metallic click followed by the buzz of the bulb warming up, was background noise in countless American households for decades. Wall switch requirements in building codes spread through the mid-20th century, and new construction stopped installing pull-chain-only fixtures in habitable rooms. Number 21. The cold air cupboard. In kitchens of the 19th and early 20th century, Before the electric refrigerator became standard, many homes included a food storage cabinet built into the north-facing exterior kitchen wall, with a small screened vent opening to the outside and no insulation between the cabinet's back wall and the cold outside air. In winter and in the shoulder seasons, this made the cupboard naturally cold, cold enough to keep butter firm, to slow the ripening of fruit, to hold leftover cooked meat for a day. The cold air cupboard was not a substitute for the icebox, but a supplement to it, providing cool storage for items that needed just a degree below room temperature rather than actual refrigeration. In farmhouses across the northern states, these wall cupboards were standard and were sometimes called the cold safe or the meat safe. The electric refrigerator, which could be set to a consistent temperature regardless of season, made the cold air cupboard redundant. Many were sealed up and insulated during kitchen renovations. Number 20. The spring house. On farms and rural properties with a reliable spring on the land, the spring house was the household's refrigeration system before electricity arrived. It was a small stone or brick structure built directly over or beside the spring, designed so that the cold spring water flowed through a channel in the floor or through shallow stone troughs inside the building, keeping the interior temperature near the water temperature, typically between 45 and 55 degrees year-round. Crocks of butter and cream were set directly in the flowing water. Milk cans stood in the stream channel. Cured meats hung from the ceiling beams above the constant cool air. The spring house worked without any human effort once it was built. The spring did the cooling, and the structure kept the weather out. As rural electrification brought electric refrigerators to farm properties through the 1930s and 1940s, the spring house was no longer the primary cold storage option. Most were eventually abandoned and fell into disrepair. Number 19. The home workshop. In the American household of the late 19th and early 20th century, the ability to maintain, repair, and build household objects was not a hobby, but a practical necessity. The home workshop was a standard provision in the basement or in a dedicated section of the garage or barn. A heavy workbench with a woodworking vise at one end, a rack of hand tools on the wall above it, a grinder and a drill press on a separate stand, and drawers of hardware sorted by size. The workshop was where broken chairs were re-glued, where fence boards were cut to length, where a new shelf was built for the pantry, where a child's wooden toy was repaired. Men who grew up with a workshop passed the habit and the tools to their sons as a matter of course. Number 18. The smokehouse. On American farms and in rural households through the early 20th century, the smokehouse was as essential an outbuilding as the barn or the outhouse. It was a small, tight structure, typically built of logs or dense planked wood with minimal ventilation gaps, where cured pork, beef, poultry, and sausage were hung over a slow-burning hardwood fire and smoked for days at a time to preserve them for the months ahead. The smoke penetrated the meat and created a surface hostile to the bacteria and insects that would otherwise spoil it. A well-smoked ham could last a year without refrigeration in a cool, dry storage area. The smokehouse was not a quick process. Smoking a full hog took most of a week and required attention to the fire's temperature and the wood's moisture. As commercial meatpacking plants with mechanical refrigeration expanded their reach through the early 20th century, and as rural households could purchase preserved meats from stores rather than producing their own, the backyard smokehouse fell into disuse. Number 17. The pump house. On rural and small-town properties with private wells, the wellhead was not simply a pipe sticking out of the ground. It was enclosed in a small, dedicated structure, the pump house, typically a wooden shed large enough to stand in, built around the well opening to protect the water supply from surface contamination and to keep the pipe and pump mechanism from freezing in winter. The pump house held the hand pump, or, later, the electric pump motor, a pressure tank, and the basic tools needed to service the well. In colder regions it was insulated and sometimes heated by a small stovepipe run from the main house. The pump house represented the household's acknowledgement that its water supply needed stewardship and protection, not just extraction. Municipal water service, expanding through the mid-20th century, eliminated the need for private well management in most suburban and urban households. Number 16. The outdoor root house. Distinct from the basement root cellar inside the house, the outdoor root house was a separate structure, sometimes a low mound of earth and sod covering a stone or log chamber built into a hillside or excavated into a slope where the earth's natural insulation provided ideal cold storage conditions without the temperature swings of a basement near a heated house. The earth-covered structure maintained a more consistent temperature than any basement and could be placed at a distance from the house for fire safety and to avoid the warmth that central heating added to interior basements. Root houses held potatoes, turnips, carrots, cabbages, and apples through the winter, in conditions that kept them firm and fresh through April. In the Ozarks, in Appalachia, and across the rural Midwest, the hillside root house was a standard provision on any farm with a suitable slope. As refrigeration replaced cold storage techniques and as food preservation became primarily a commercial rather than a household function, the outdoor root house was abandoned on most properties. Number 15. The ice house. Before mechanical refrigeration, before the railroad expanded the reach of commercial ice distribution, and before the corner hardware store sold bags of ice by the pound, most households in the northern states that could afford it maintained their own supply of ice through the summer months by cutting it in winter and storing it in a dedicated building, the ice house. Ice cutting happened on frozen ponds and rivers in January and February, when the ice reached a thickness of 12 to 16 inches or more. Teams of men with horse-drawn saws cut the ice into standard blocks, typically weighing between 1 and 200 pounds each, hauled them to the ice house on sleds, and stacked them in alternating layers of sawdust or straw that insulated one block from the next and absorbed the slow melt. A well-built ice house could retain ice from February through September in most northern climates, and in exceptional cases through the following winter. The construction was specific. The walls were thick, usually double-planked with an insulating fill of sawdust between them. The floor sloped to drain meltwater away from the ice blocks. The entrance was small and faced north to minimize solar gain, and the interior was kept dark. Wealthy households had ice houses on their own properties. Small towns often had a community ice house at the edge of the pond, operated commercially by the iceman who supplied the neighborhood's boxes. The technology of ice cutting and ice storage was sophisticated enough that American entrepreneurs were exporting New England pond ice to the Caribbean and to India by the 1830s, a trade that lasted until mechanical refrigeration rendered it obsolete. In the American household, the transition from natural ice to machine ice to the household refrigerator happened over roughly 50 years, from the 1880s through the 1930s. The ice houses themselves were dismantled or repurposed. The sawdust-filled walls were found to be useful for other kinds of cold storage, and many became general farm storage sheds. Number 14. The tradesman's entrance. In American homes built through the early 20th century, the front door was not the door through which the household's daily commerce was conducted. The tradesman, the deliveryman, the iceman, the dry goods peddler, the milkman, and the coal delivery crew all entered the household's economy through a separate entrance, typically at the side or back of the house, reached by a path from the street or alley that bypassed the front walk and the front porch entirely. The tradesman's entrance was often marked by a small covered porch or overhang, a doorbell set at the side, and sometimes a small shelf or ledge where deliveries could be left without requiring anyone in the house to come to the door. The architectural separation was a social one. It organized the household's relationships with the commercial world in a way that kept that commerce from the formal social spaces at the front. Number 13. The fireside coal scuttle niche. In homes that heated with coal through the 19th and early 20th century, the parlor or sitting room fireplace was accompanied by a small built-in niche or recessed alcove in the masonry at the side of the hearth, sized precisely to hold the coal scuttle, the handled metal bucket used to carry coal from the basement bin to the fireplace. The niche kept the scuttle from occupying floor space and positioned it at the optimal height and angle for loading the fire. Some niches were fitted with a small iron door. Others were open recesses in the brick or stone surround. Fireplace tools, the poker, the tongs, the brush, hung on a companion stand beside the scuttle niche. The entire hearth ensemble, niche, tools, mantel, and fender, was designed as an integrated unit. As gas and electric heating replaced coal, the coal scuttle niche was sealed, tiled over, or converted to a log storage recess in homes that converted to decorative wood fires. Number 12. The bedroom fireplace. In the American house before central heating, warmth was not distributed evenly through the building by a single furnace. Each room that needed to be warm had its own heat source, and in the principal sleeping rooms of well-built homes, that meant a fireplace. The bedroom fireplace was smaller than the parlor version, with a narrow opening and a modest mantel, but it was fully functional. A fire set in the evening warmed the room before bed, burned down through the night, and left a bed of coals warm enough to take the chill off the morning dressing. Each bedroom fireplace had its own flue, which ran up through the wall and joined the central chimney stack. Houses with 4 bedrooms had 4 bedroom flues plus the parlor and kitchen flues, all converging at the same chimney. Central heating, arriving in American residential construction through the early 20th century, eliminated the need for individual room fires. Number 11. The garden cold frame. In the kitchen gardens of American homes through the mid-20th century, the cold frame was as standard a piece of equipment as the spade or the hoe. It was a simple bottomless box, typically 3 to 4 feet wide and 6 to 8 feet long, with low sides in front and higher sides at the back, covered with an old window sash glazed with actual glass, a salvage storm window set at an angle to catch the maximum winter sun. The cold frame sat over a prepared garden bed and created a microclimate warm enough to start seeds in February and March, weeks before outdoor planting was safe, and to harden off seedlings started indoors before they were transplanted to the open garden. In autumn, it extended the season past the first killing frost, protecting spinach, kale, and lettuce for weeks of additional harvest. The cold frame required no electricity, no heating system, and no specialized materials. It was built from lumber scraps and old window glass. Number 10. The front yard picket fence. Through most of American residential history, the boundary between the private household lot and the public street was marked by a fence, typically a painted wooden picket fence, 3 to 4 feet high, with a gate in the center aligned with the front walk. The fence was not primarily a security feature. It was a social marker, the visible acknowledgement that here was a private property with its own standards, maintained by the family within. The white picket fence in particular became so central to the visual vocabulary of the American home that it came to represent the aspiration of domestic life itself. In practice, these fences required painting every few years, a task that fell to whoever was available, and they marked the corners of lots with a precision that made property boundaries visible to everyone on the block. Post-war suburban planning favored open front lawns with no boundary fencing, a layout that emphasized the visual continuity of the street and was promoted by municipal planning standards of the era. Number 9. The hitching post. At the curb in front of American homes, businesses, and public buildings through the era of horse-drawn transportation, a cast iron post or a stone block stood at the edge of the sidewalk, the hitching post. You looped your horse's reins over it and went about your business. Cast iron hitching posts came in dozens of styles from foundry catalogs. Simple posts with a ring at the top, ornamental posts shaped like a jockey or a horse's head, posts with a loop and a fingil. Some were freestanding, others were set into the curbing or into a stone block at the base. They appeared in every American town and city as a standard piece of street furniture. The automobile arrived, and the horse traffic it served disappeared, but the hitching posts themselves were slow to go. Many were simply abandoned at the curb, painted over periodically with house colors, then eventually removed during street improvement projects. Number 8. The keeping room. In colonial and early American homes, the kitchen hearth was the primary heat source for the entire house, and the room built around it, often called the keeping room or the hall, was designed to capitalize on that warmth. It was a multi-purpose room adjacent to the kitchen, containing the dining table, the rocking chairs, the spinning wheel, the cradle, and whatever tasks required warmth to complete. The family spent most of its waking hours in the keeping room from October through April because it was simply the warmest place in the house. Sleeping in the keeping room on the coldest nights was not unusual. The room that we now call the family room or the great room, the informal living space that opens to the kitchen in contemporary home design, is a direct descendant of the keeping room without the fireplace that gave it its name and its purpose. Number 7. The central chimney stack. In American houses of the 17th, 18th, and early 19th centuries, particularly in New England, the chimney was not a slender element at the end of the house. It was a massive central masonry structure, sometimes 8 or 10 feet wide at the base, built at the exact center of the house so that all the rooms on each floor had direct access to a fireplace flue. The central chimney served the kitchen hearth on the ground floor, the keeping room fireplace, the parlor fireplace, and the bedroom fireplaces above, all through a single masonry mass that retained heat from all those fires and radiated it into the house's interior. The chimney itself was a thermal anchor. As houses grew larger, and as the architectural fashion shifted toward end chimneys and eventually toward distributed flues at the perimeter walls, the central stack became less common in new construction. Central heating eliminated the fireplace as a heating necessity entirely. Number 6. The parlor music corner. In the American home of the Victorian and Edwardian eras, music was not something that came from a speaker or a screen. It was something produced in the parlor, and the parlor was organized around the expectation that it would be. The parlor piano stood in a specific corner or along a specific wall, its position determined at the time the furniture was arranged and rarely changed thereafter. Sheet music stood in the piano bench. A music cabinet with compartmented slots for the household's collection of sheet music stood nearby. In some homes, a violin or a guitar hung on the wall in a bracket beside the piano. The parlor music corner was a cultural assumption that the household contained people who could play and who would play for one another and for guests on Sunday evenings or at family gatherings. Radio, and then the record player, and then television, systematically replaced home music making as the household's primary form of entertainment. The parlor piano corner became a place to put the television. Number 5. The cedar-lined wardrobe. Before synthetic moth repellents, before cedar blocks and cedar rings sold in plastic packages at every houseware store, the moth problem in stored wool clothing was managed in American households by a dedicated cedar-lined storage space, either a freestanding wardrobe built from aromatic cedar or a cedar-paneled closet where the fragrant oil of the eastern red cedar wood was sufficient to deter the wool moths that would otherwise damage stored blankets, winter coats, and wool suits through the summer months. Cedar wardrobes were family heirlooms, passed from generation to generation, their fragrance renewed periodically by light sanding of the interior panels. In houses built with a dedicated cedar closet, the small room off the master bedroom or the upstairs hall, paneled in cedar from floor to ceiling, held the family's stored winter clothing from April through October. The cedar smell that greeted you when you opened the door was one of those sensory details that people who grew up with it recall instantly. Number 4. The pantry window. In the pantries and cold air cupboards of older American homes, particularly those built in the northern states where winter temperatures provided reliable natural refrigeration, a small window was often set into the exterior wall at pantry height. A screened opening perhaps 12 inches wide and 6 inches tall, fitted with a sliding panel or a small hinged door that could be opened to draw cold outside air into the pantry interior during winter months. The pantry window was not a feature that appeared in any architectural catalog under that name. It was a practical addition made by builders or by homeowners who understood that the north wall of the kitchen, with a screened opening to the outside air, was a free cold storage mechanism that required no ice, no electricity, and no maintenance. Butter and cream and leftover cooked food kept near refrigerator temperature through the cold months simply by proximity to the outside air. Number 3. The display niche. In living rooms and hallways of American homes built from roughly the 1890s through the 1930s, small recessed niches were sometimes built into the wall at eye height, typically between two studs, with a small shelf at the bottom and a plaster or tile surround. A space sized and positioned to hold a single decorative object, a vase, a small statue, a candlestick, The display niche was a domestic detail, common enough to appear in pattern book house designs of the period and in the Sears Modern Homes catalog, that treated the wall itself as a surface worth designing rather than merely a background. It required no furniture, took up no floor space, and created a focal point in a passage or a corner that would otherwise have been unmarked. The niche was plastered in with the rest of the wall and finished to match the surrounding trim. Number 2. Horsehair plaster walls. Every house built in America before roughly the 1940s and 1950s was finished on the interior with the same wall system, wooden lath nailed horizontally across the studs, covered with multiple coats of wet plaster mixed with animal hair, typically from cattle or horses, that bound the material together as it cured. Horsehair plaster walls were hard, dense, and durable in a way that gypsum drywall has never matched. They deadened sound between rooms. They held fasteners firmly. They were difficult to damage and easy to patch when they were. A house with original plaster walls in good condition is quieter, sturdier, and more fire-resistant than an equivalent house finished in drywall. The plastering trade was skilled work. A good plasterer worked in broad, smooth strokes, building thickness in layers and feathering each coat into the last, producing a surface that was level and consistent in ways that no drywall joint compound ever fully replicates. Number 1. The hand-forged iron door hardware. On every house built before manufactured hardware arrived in bulk from industrial foundries, the front door's knocker, the hinges, the latch, and the lock were made one at a time by a local blacksmith or by a small regional foundry, in iron that was hammered and shaped by hand and fitted to that specific door in that specific frame. The hardware was heavy, slightly irregular, and built to outlast the house it was mounted on. Hand-forged hinges are still opening and closing on doors in American houses built in the 18th and early 19th centuries because the iron in them was worked cold and slowly, producing a density and a grain structure that modern stamped hardware doesn't approach. The thumb latches on colonial doorways, the strap hinges on farmhouse doors, the hand-hammered knockers in the shapes of eagles and hands and acorns that announced a visitor's arrival, all were made with the expectation that they would last indefinitely. Every single item on this list was, at some point, simply how an American house worked, not a luxury, not a specialty feature, not something you paid extra for, just a house, built to last, built around the rhythms of actual domestic life, built with the expectation that the people inside it would be doing things, making food, storing food, washing clothes, heating rooms, receiving neighbors. The houses that contained all of these features were not remarkable. They were ordinary, and the fact that most of them are gone now, replaced by houses that are larger in square footage and emptier of specific purpose, says something about how thoroughly the way we live has changed in 100 years. If any of these rang a bell for you, leave a comment below and tell us which one you remember most clearly. And if you enjoyed the trip back through the American home as it used to be built, hit subscribe, because there is plenty more where this came from.